So meet up in person. Maybe it'll be different. Spoiler alert, it was.
Picture it. St. Mary's, Georgia. I'm in 5th grade, circa 1990. At this point in my life, I was getting picked on pretty hardcore. I was fat, I was sweaty, I was not athletic, I was effeminate, and all the charisma that would later come out in me was pretty dormant at this point. And I had this one kid in particular who seemed to make it his life's goal to get a rise out of me every day. His name was Eric, and everything I wasn't, he was. He was athletic, he was fit, he was confident, he had all these friends, and, you know, looking back on it, I have no idea why he felt the need to pick on me, but, you know, some people do that. The point is that he was everything I wanted to be, and probably before I even realized what my sexuality was, I think I developed a crush on him, which is so sad when you think about it, because it's just that cliched story of gay kid falls in love with his bully. But I definitely wanted to be his friend, and in lieu of that, I was willing to take his abuse. Until one day I wasn't. And that was the day that I ended up clocking him real hard in the face. And this was not one of those situations where the kid who gets bullied is the one who gets blamed for everything. No, everybody knew he bullied me. However, you can't give a kid a fat lip and a bloody nose and not expect somebody to call your parents. So the principal called both our parents, and our parents set up this soiree, this powwow, where they were going to discuss what was wrong with their sons. Now, I do not know what Eric said to his parents in between the day I hit him and the day that we went over to his house, but something went down because his parents seemed to think that we were like the best of friends, or at least really good friends. And this fight was like a legitimate fluke, and he was amazed that he hadn't told his parents about me before because we were so close, and he wanted me to come over and hang out. And so we went over there that night, and Eric charmed my parents. His parents loved me, although most kids' parents loved me because I was that kind of nerd. But his parents loved me. Our parents got along, and I began the night with trepidation, and I ended the night wanting desperately to believe in this new version of reality that Eric had introduced to us. In the same way that people in third world countries get enamored with the idea of being saved by Jesus when they hear the gospel, I heard Eric's gospel of our friendship, and I began to want to worship. It became my religion. In just those 12 hours, it became what I lived for because I suddenly wanted so bad. I had been starved for so long for emotional and social validation that I wanted to believe in this new religion. The next day, he shoved me so hard into a brick wall that it dislocated my shoulder, and then stood there and laughed with his friends over my body. People want desperately to matter. It's part of our genetic makeup because we're a social species, and if we don't matter to each other, then we don't survive. So people want to have contact and to matter to each other. Bill Maher wants desperately to matter. I have watched him get more and more self-conscious and panicky about his aging and lack of relevancy, to the point that he is now willing to believe Donald Trump is okay with being his friend, and Donald Trump's behavior is excusable as long as Donald Trump will pay him some attention. It is one of the saddest things I've ever seen. 20 years ago, I saw my first episode of Real Time with Bill Maher. I remember it had Dan Savage and Eve Ensler on it. I also remember being excited because I had just started to realize that I had a stake in the political climate of this country. And hearing Bill Maher on his show espousing common sense liberal principles basically made me excited to be an American. Now, yeah, I'm sure that I was proud to be an American before that, but before that also I had been mostly a teenager and a college student, and I didn't realize until that point precisely why I should be proud to be an American. I knew it was something I needed to be, but I didn't know what the reasons were. Yeah, I think they're different for just about everybody, but there are a few key ones. I also didn't know exactly what I would have to do or how hard I would have to work in order to keep the liberties that I was guaranteed by the Constitution alive. I remember I rewatched that first episode like 3 or 4 times because I TiVoed it. This is back during TiVo. And the next week I rewatched that one. The next week I rewatched that one. Then I think it went on hiatus, but I could not wait for the next season. And during the break between seasons, I began to engage in like different other media outlets that were liberal, like Air America Radio, NPR, watching MSNBC. I became infatuated with the new level of inspiration that I was feeling about the future and what I could be and who I could become and what the world could become. About 10 years ago, I began to notice that there were times when Bill Maher did not necessarily seem to appreciate everyone's full-fledged freedom of expression. I started to notice a shift in his attitude, and it became glaringly obvious that he had a pretty big chip on his shoulder when it came to aging in Hollywood. He began to rant about how ageism was the only ism that was left that could be explored in this country, and that everything, you couldn't be racist, you couldn't be misogynist, but you could be ageist. Then he basically broke down in tears when he turned 60 and had to put on glasses. But even though I didn't necessarily believe or jive with everything he was saying, and even though he was developing this sort of old man from Up aesthetic, I still believed in the general principles that I thought he held dear, because, yeah, sometimes he would make jokes about gay people, but they were always couched in a way where he seemed to believe in the liberty to practice love the way you saw it behind closed doors, as long as it was between consenting adults. And no, I didn't like it when he compared being gay to being a polygamist, but I had to admit that, consenting adults, what they do is what they do. Although between you and me, now that I have more education, I realize that there's a difference, because polygamy often favors the domineering man, and it basically enslaves the multiple women who are at the behest of the men in the society. But that's neither here nor there. Then about 6 years ago, I started to realize that it didn't matter what the topic was, and it didn't matter who the guests were. I could not get through his new rules segment without feeling annoyed, disappointed, almost feeling betrayed at the myopic point of view and the lowbrow humor, like punching down jabs at people. And it also became more and more obvious that he hated aging, and he hated realizing that he was getting older. That's why I find it vaguely humorous when I noticed how much like an old man he was becoming. Every time he talked about trans rights or gay rights or racial inequality or Black Lives Matter or any one of the millions of causes he would have championed 20, 30, 40 years ago, he would be flippant at best and derogatory at worst. And even when I did agree with him on things like the uselessness of hyper-woke student protests against like the professors at Stanford or whatever, or protests against free speech at Berkeley or Harvard, I couldn't actually sit through him making his point without fearing that he was going to throw a rock at me for being on his lawn. Now, unfortunately, this shift in sentiment has almost become full circle, and Bill Maher has become the thing that he used to rail against and swear he hated, which is an inauthentic, disingenuous old man with nothing more substance to say, yet talking the loudest in the room to appear relevant and feel important. Going to see Donald Trump at the White House and not hating it does not make you important or relevant. What it makes you is the useful idiot that Donald Trump knows you are. This was a long video, and it took a lot for me to get through and tell my story. So if you support that, or if you want to hear more from me, please like and subscribe. It would, or follow. It would mean a lot to me. And make sure you visit me on YouTube as well. Thanks. Bye-bye. Love you, call you, drive safe, make good choices.